First of all, thank you everyone for joining us. This session is called Strategic Sustainability Mindsets, Throwing Off the Yoke of Neoclassical Economics. And presenting today will be Isabella, Krysa, Gerard, Farias, Joel Harmon from Fairleigh Dickinson University, as well as Farias from CUNY University in New York. Take it away. Good luck.
Thank you, Deborah. Welcome, everybody. I have basically one of the trigger questions for this paper is what will make sustainability sustainable? And if you keep that question in mind as we go along, I think it will resonate. So I am Gerard Farias from FDU, Christine Farias from BMCC CUNY, Isabella Krysa from FDU Vancouver, and Joel Harmon from FDU New Jersey. And thank you so much for being here. Isabella will start us off. So.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gerard. So I'm Isabella Krysa from Fairleigh Dickinson University, and I'm currently here in Vancouver at 10:10 a.m. So in a nutshell, our paper addresses the perceived tensions with regards to corporate sustainability, where the current business paradigm asks to manage the financial health of the corporation with social and environmental concerns. So the infamous triple bottom line, people, profit, planet. And as the title of our PowerPoint, starts off, the current situation on sustainability, we are all aware about the current state of sustainability of our planet. We all remember Greta Thunberg traveling the world last year, talking to leaders from politics, society, the media, to raise awareness about climate change and the existential crisis we face. So our paper looks at more specifically what is happening in the business world, how is the topic on sustainability, the issue dealt with. So the role of business is seen both as one of the major perpetrators to the issue of sustainability, as well as a crucial institution to address the issue of true sustainability. And we will discuss in more detail what we mean by true sustainability. In our paper, we investigate the question why corporate responsibility has not yielded any real improved results, although it has been practiced in the business world for many decades now. So next slide. So to a large extent, the way corporations deal with sustainability has been dominated by the neoliberal agenda. Friedman infamously argued that corporations' main priority should be shareholders' profit maximization, and that sustainability should be subjugated to this ideology, hence the business case argument. Referred to as instrumental paradigm, this approach views sustainability only legitimate if it contributes to corporations' profit maximization and benefits corporations' financial health. However, we argue that this approach results in what we refer to as weak sustainability, meaning that the stock of natural capital is being depleted. Such weak sustainability will weaken nature's infrastructure and have long-term consequences for the generations to come on nature and the entire ecosystem. Therefore, we argue that all definitions of sustainability should focus on the needs of current and future generations. This is only possible with strong sustainability, which calls for the preservation of ecosystems that make the life on Earth even possible. So the ability of future generations and meeting their needs has to be taken into consideration. This can only happen if the stock of natural capital is not depleted. We note in our paper, in our research as well, that the concept of strong sustainability has not received much attention in the business literature. So sustainability for us is an issue on societal, institutional, and individual level. Attempting to address sustainability issues at the corporate level alone without looking at the wider context is, according to us, simply limiting in its effects and also counterproductive.
So I'm Christine Farias from the Borough of Manhattan Community College with the University of New York. So continuing on that note, to address the question, why are we not making sufficient progress on sustainability? The current business paradigm is built using the neoclassical economic perspective as a foundation. As we all know, this perspective is based on assumptions of self-interest and shareholder primacy. The assumption of self-interest essentially takes the position that humans act in their own self-interest. The neoclassical perspective seeks to leverage this self-interest to enable economic growth. Financial reward is expected to incentivize business owners and managers grow their businesses and in turn grow national and global economies. By advocating shareholder primacy, the neoclassical perspective seeks to emphasize shareholders at the expense of other participants in a firm's value chain, thus making employees, customers, the community, and planet Earth victims of exploitation. At this point, I just want to remind you that all these economic actors are really citizens and stewards of the planet. This perspective is in direct contrast to the sustainability perspective that advocates fairness and justice for all participants in the value chain, a multiple stakeholder perspective. In an environment where the neoclassical economic perspective dominates, the attempts to adopt the sustainability perspective gives rise to tensions that managers are then forced to grapple with as they navigate the competing values and frameworks of the two perspectives. We argue that the tensions are a figment of imagination. They only arise because we have not wholeheartedly rejected the neoclassical perspective. Clinging to the neoclassical perspective has resulted in half-hearted approaches and partial approaches to sustainability. So what if we did away with this? In effect, the neoclassical perspective and accompanying tensions are the yoke or burden that constrain and limit sustainability strategies. So countering the foundational assumptions, we articulate arguments that counter these assumptions constraining us based on self-interest, where Donaldson and Walsh have argued for the dignity of all participants, that is, all people affected directly and indirectly by business in their new theory of business. With regard to maximization of shareholder wealth, Friedman advocated for the pursuit of increased profits through open competition without deception or fraud. Again, I repeat, without deception or fraud. Jensen argued that social welfare is maximized after firms account for externalities. And again, I want to stress, after firms account for externalities. So from Friedman and Jenkins themselves, who were strong advocates for the neoclassical perspective, we see these two comments that these two aspects that they indicate. So these guardrails and qualifiers, however, are ignored in the current real-world manifestations of the role of business in society. So resolving these tensions in managing sustainability, what does the literature provide us with? The literature discusses 4 ways to resolve these tensions. The first one, trade-off between sustainability and financial outcomes. Trade one for the other. This approach is based on the idea that the firm will need to sacrifice financial performance for sustainability, or vice versa. We argue that financial performance would usually be given priority in today's business world. The second way to resolve these tensions is the famous win-win. Find ways to achieve both simultaneously, usually manifested in resource efficiencies. Improvements in labor and resource productivity results in lower costs as well as less waste, thus improving both financial and environmental performance. This is simply a manifestation of the business case and does not address those situations where the business case is not obvious or does not exist. Integration, finding a balance between financial and sustainable outcomes. In reality, we argue that because of the quantifiability and speed of financial outcomes, they will tend to hold the typical manager's attention much more than social and environmental outcomes, which are abstract and have much longer time lags. The fourth way to resolve these tensions is paradox. Resolution is a constant managerial responsibility. Again, I stress responsibility, managerial responsibility. Here again, the quantifiability and speed of financial outcomes will dominate managerial thinking. And therefore, there's this constant managerial juggling act on a case-by-case basis. However, surprisingly, these approaches do not include the most common ways firms have managed their so-called tensions, basically missing in the literature. Hypocrisy, lack of consistency between talk, decisions, and action to manage the demands of competing stakeholders. The second one is greenwashing, simply lying about sustainability.
So I'm Gerard Farias back again. And so the impacts of this yoke, right? So sustainability strategies constrained by tensions will only result in partial approaches. And they actually give companies an opportunity to create the facade of sustainability, claiming full sustainability, while in reality, it's only partial. And so the claims of sustainability eventually turn out to be a myth. And we must be clear, any negative externalities means that the firm is not accounting for all its cost and its reported financial performance is suspect. Basically, they have transferred value from society or from other entities outside their boundaries internally, and that amounts to deception and fraud. Through its emphasis on self-interest and shareholder primacy, managerial attention is focused on the firm level of analysis, giving rise to this mythical notion of corporate sustainability and neglecting sustainability at the planetary and societal levels. So this yoke needs to be thrown away and by lifting the yoke of neoclassical economic assumptions will eliminate the tensions and the need to resolve them, leading to, as we depict here, a more harmonious relationship between people, businesses, and the planet. So how do we get sustainability right? And our perspective here is that we need to focus on the right level of analysis, that is at the planetary and societal levels. And by shifting this emphasis, by creating responsible firms, we pay more attention to the impacts outside the boundaries of the firm, particularly the negative impacts, and bring responsibility to the firm level, which then generates sustainability at the planetary and societal levels. We want to emphasize, we take a comprehensive view of sustainability. That is the elimination or 100% mitigation of all harms, zero negative externalities. Any externalities, negative externalities that are not accounted for are simply, as we said earlier, deception and fraud. To also emphasize here, we do note that there are such things as positive externalities. However, those are already accounted for with the firm's license to exist. That by obtaining a license to exist, they are already being rewarded for the positive externalities they generate. So the other way of thinking about this is to zoom out, right? So right now, the attention with the traditional lenses that have been adopted focuses attention of managers towards the firm and the economy, as manifested in shareholder primacy and at the more macro level at the GDP. In the form of GDP. But we know both these are flawed and misleading measures of both firm level performance as well as societal level performance. GDP includes, as Robert Kennedy once said, everything except that which really matters. So we call for the addition of a spatial lens, a temporal lens, and a moral lens to expand the scope of vision for managers to bring in both the societal, planetary levels of analysis. This responds to the call by Shad and Bansal that to zoom out and bring these planetary level societal and planetary level needs into focus. So getting sustainability right. True sustainability will only happen when firms define their purpose based on the needs of humanity and the planet for current and future generations. We really want to emphasize this thing, I think, which is really hasn't been noted too much, at least in the business literature, that even if we go back to the famous Brundtland Commission definition of sustainability, there are no boundaries that surround the word future generations. There are no time limits. So when we think about future generations, how far into the future do we really consider this? Is it 100 years? Is it 1,000 years? Is it 10,000 years? And if we think about it from that perspective, the preservation of the ecosystems that make life on Earth possible need to be maintained. If they're not maintained, then future generations are in serious jeopardy, as we are already experiencing today. So this importance of emphasizing strong rather than weak sustainability gains added emphasis. So to conclude, the neoclassical perspective dominates current business philosophy today. Clinging to this perspective gives rise to the perception of tensions. The perception of tensions leads to limited and partial approaches to sustainability. Planetary and societal needs become secondary under this perspective. It makes corporate sustainability a myth. And eliminating the neoclassical economic perspective will rid us of the tyranny of tensions and free business leaders to focus on true sustainability. So we'd call on all of you present here to imagine, how would the elimination of neoclassical perspective impact corporations? What would the future company look like? Secondly, how would the elimination of the neoclassical perspective change society and the prospects for current and future generations? And thirdly, how would the elimination of the neoclassical economic perspective change the prospects for the planet? We will, for now, leave you with those questions. Thank you for listening, and we welcome your comments and suggestions. And I'm going to post those questions back again so that we can focus on them while we engage in discussion. Thank you for listening. And if there are any comments from my co-authors, I invite you to add them right now. Otherwise,
Sandra, if you want to pose share your comment, you can unmute your microphone. Or are you too busy typing? I don't think I can unmute her directly.
Sandra's muted.
Sandra, you want to unmute yourself? Okay, well, we're waiting for Sandra.
You want me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure. I think I missed the question.
The question was what you posted in the chat. Do you want to add your comment? Do you want to share that comment?
I just posted a link.
Okay.
To the collective value. Well, just in picking up on the conversation that was going on, or this presentation that was going on, Donaldson and Walsh have developed this idea of collective value, which I think is really, really a great construct, and that we ought to be thinking about changing the purpose of business, they call it, to this notion of collective value, which is the good of the whole, absent dignity violations. It's an amazing paper. And so I posted a link to it in the chat.
Okay.
Thank you. Heba, would you like to share your comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that a lot of times the financial gains of these sustainability programs aren't really received until years down the road. And then it makes it that much more difficult, or at least in my experience, to convince managers of the business value of the sustainability programs. And so that's just based on my experience, if there are any suggestions, because a lot of managers at the end of the day, the bottom line is they look at those numbers, and that's really what they care about.
Would you like, Heba, I think one of the key issues with regard to that is if, I think the argument that that these, if they are making profits today, and if they're thinking, oh, the returns are going to be so much later, it basically, it means that there are externalities today that the firm is not accounting for. So at a larger, broader perspective, I think it raises the question of how they are accounting right now and what impact that has. So I think our paper's kind of saying, step back, and if you truly believe in sustainability, then you have to account for externalities. And if they're not being accounted for, those profits or gains that they're showing are really not true gains and not really earned by them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Matt, do you want to unmute yourself and ask share your comment about neoclassical economics being in a mixed bag?
We struggle with this.
You muted yourself, Matt.
Am I in now?
Yeah, you are.
Oh, that comment? Okay. Well, I've taught economics of sustainability, and the perspective I have of it is to treat it as a mixed bag. Yes to all the negatives that you guys have eloquently expressed, definitely. But, there's also some value in it. That, the idea of efficiency, which itself is a mixed bag, needs to be analyzed. A lot of it is very helpful. The idea of opportunity costs, the positive externalities often gets mixed and can be built on. So I think it's also not consistent with what we still think about a win-win perspective and a multidisciplinary perspective to simply say throw it out. So that's that particular comment.
Oh yeah, I think we acknowledge that, but the issue is currently mostly firms adopt a compensatory approach. They do good somewhere and they do bad somewhere else, and that is not really reflective of sustainability. So the idea of compensating one for the other is really deflecting attention from the real problems that are being faced. So I think that's why integrated reporting, for instance, becomes such a critical issue where all these aspects are tied in together rather than seen separately. I don't know if that answers your response to your comment and question.
If I may just add to that that comment, I think it's also something to think about is do these negative externalities outweigh the positive externalities? And in that sense, we definitely need to consider the negative externalities because they, as we can see, they are outweighing the positive externalities. And so that's where the hypocrisy and the greenwashing comes in. And I think we're at a juncture that we really need to take this very, very seriously because we don't have much time left if we have to make a major change in mindsets. And I think that's what our paper is trying to bring across.
So it seems to me that if we follow this to its logical conclusion, the idea of profit itself is a shiny object, a red herring that we should discard altogether. Because I don't know of a single business model that would turn, quote, a profit, in air quotes, if they accounted for all of the natural capital and all of the social capital that they used and replenished the same, right? I don't think that we know how to do this yet in any way, shape, or form. To add to that, how would you account for this anyway? We just got through some sessions saying how difficult it is to price eco services, for example, that we use we consume these eco services. And so any accounting of it is really a fiction, because we'll manipulate that accounting system and set prices in a way that we can, quote, make a profit if the goal is to make a profit.
Yeah, I want to call on, thank you, Dilip, to Bill to comment on, and Sandra too. I would just say that you could look to interface carpeting for a company that has either begun to fully account for its externalities or offset them in various ways. And I'm still a little surprised that their model has not been has not expanded more fully into a lot of, well-intentioned in other companies. And anyway, there's this comment here along your lines about full cost accounting. There's a recognition that absolutely we need full cost accounting. Bill, would you like to comment? You've always been an advocate of this and are very knowledgeable about this. Bill Russell?
Somebody needs to mute.
Bill, are you there, Bill?
Well, I think I kind of fall into Dilip's camp a bit, in the sense that what we've been seeing as we dug deeper into actually trying to put the concept into practice was that there's too many. Look at the planetary boundaries, for example. They haven't even yet measured the thresholds as to what those boundaries are. And so we sit here and talk like we can account for them and put a price on them, and we haven't even put a scientific number on them. So the idea of trying to now create an economy that's measuring something that we don't measure is putting the cart before the horse. So I think we need to pay more attention to non-financial performance measures, and then crafting a new economy that can set the prices in the markets better, not perfectly in any way, but at least better, towards driving those planetary threshold-based and science-based outcomes. But when I listened, I loved the presentation, Gerard. I love it. I think it asks all of the truthful questions, but at the same time, all we still have is questions. In order to put this into practice, we got to put some answers up on the board and then go for some unknown targets, or at least some aspirational targets.
Well, I hope we never stop asking questions or having questions to ask. And
so if we discard entirely the profit and loss statement altogether because we accept it as fictional, the next approach would be to view how resources are viewed, how resources are used, and what value they create and for whom, right? And an approach that is based on that perspective without getting mired in the weeds of, revenue and cost and all of that stuff. And of course, we need a systematic approach to understand how resources are allocated by whom and what value they create, correct?
I think there are a couple of things that we should add to this. And I think it came up with Andy Hoffman's session this morning. One is, these are questions I raised actually, but one was about consumption and growth, right? Can we continue to maintain the levels of consumption that exist today, even while the global population rises to 9.5 to 10 billion by the middle of the century? Can we continue to have the levels of poverty that exist today while there's so much imbalance in terms of consumption on a global basis? I think those are also, and those boil down directly to the business models that firms currently operate with. So things like the precautionary principle, things like continuous growth, all those things, I think, while we played around here really with the firm level and trying to shift the emphasis to a more macro level, I think those are also bigger questions that tie into the argument that we're making here. So yes, accounting is definitely, and measurement are big issues. Like what is a discount rate we can use for for assessing the net present value of what is called natural capital, which is another big problem. Is it capital or is it treasure? And how do we view it? Is it expendable? So I think there are a whole lot of questions that current business literature in the context of sustainability just does not address or does not answer. And how do we really incorporate that, which I think is still playing around so much on the fringes of the real problems that we have. And so if we continue to persist with the current economic system and not question, I mean, climate change, for instance, is used so much as our existential threat. And that is obviously true. But really underlying climate change is a whole economic system that generates it. And if we don't change that, we'll have a new problem in the future. So I think these are questions that we really need to address, and I don't think we're addressing them sufficiently.
I'd love to hear from Sandra Waddick about her comment if you're there. So yes, please. Were you talking about a well-being economy?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work going on these days, not necessarily in academia, on system transformation. And you know, the questions that Gerard and Joel and Christine and Isabella are raising are really questions around system transformation. And so how do we push for I'd call it a whole new economics? I mean, neoliberalism has to go, and I think you made that point really clearly in your presentation. And then what does it take to get us to a transformed economics and economies? And there's initiatives. So they're all over the place, but one of the ones I'm familiar with is the Well-Being Economy Alliance, which tries to consolidate the work of about 150 of these next economy, new economics kinds of organizations, and in the interest of creating well-being economies oriented not towards money and just financial wealth, which is very narrow value and very narrow construct, but towards well-being, the well-being of the whole. And I posted a link to a paper I just published on reframing economics that argues for a whole new set of, I call them memes, but you know, core, you know, we know about shareholder maximization. You already just mentioned that. We know about free markets and all these things. Well, we need a set of ideas, core memes, that are equally powerful and equally compelling, that drive a whole different way of thinking about economics and economies. And I think your paper is a great start towards pushing us to really think transformatively in far more ways than we're currently doing. So I agree with you, Gerard.
Yeah, well, we've been noticing all during the last 2 days with Stu Hart and Andy Hoffman and yourself, and that this message seems to be becoming much more common, that we really need a systemic transformation, including economic. I would love to hear from you, Eunice Ariola, about your comment. There's no panacea.
Yeah, I believe there's no cure-all. There is no one solution. We really have to listen to all of these ideas, and the heart of the matter is to discern what applies to our particular realm, whether it's in accounting or in ethics or in economics. So it's good to hear all of these ideas, and we take it from our own context, but it's good to build up on all of these possible solutions, because I don't believe there's really one solution. I agree with the Professor Wadok that it's really systemic. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, if I could make a comment, I think one of the things that is we tend to talk about all of these issues in an economic or very in a somewhat tangible sense, and I wonder whether it makes sense to step back a little or a lot, maybe, to think about them in a values and principles perspective. I think Andy talked about that a lot this morning, and if we step back to zoom out even further and think about, as Sandra put it, you know, well-being. and what's good for humanity, and bring those values perspectives in, and then begin to play around with economics rather than start with economics first. Just a thought as I was listening to the comments.
So I just want to amplify that. I was thinking the same thing, Gerard, and I think that the well-being economy will require a values consensus, right? And the reason we have an impersonal transactional economy that was created in the first place is because it allows us to sidestep the values consensus. It doesn't require that anymore. And so in order to do that, we'll have to do the hard work, which will be a multi-generational effort to create a values consensus on which to build a well-being economy. Otherwise, the well-being economy won't be possible because we won't agree on what our values are in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I worry because, number one, all these discussions make it seem like humans have this ability to manage or control or price nature. And it also makes it seem like we have multi-generations to fix it. We got like 10 years. And, I watched David Attenborough's movie on Netflix. And it just is so powerful when he talks about not solving this by doing the man-made economics thing, but just rewilding like 50% of the planet. And I think that there's a little bit more merit to that type of an approach than for us to try to humanly manage it. So I just worry that we're in the wrong questioning and even in the wrong mental model of a human-centric solution versus just being a little bit more humble and finding our place in all of it.
I'd like to just comment in, imperfect solutions to critical things are sometimes worthwhile in the absence of no solutions or not even any attempts. I'm thinking again back to Interface and others who have adopted biomimicry, looking to nature, which is perfect, and trying to emulate that. Maybe that's not such arrogance, but rather more constructive humility, of recognizing that there are systems here that if we just could strive to understand them better, not destroy them, respect them, and to some extent where possible, mimic them or emulate them in our way of designing all our other systems, that we could end up being a lot better off than we are.
So we do have examples of native populations that still exist on islands in Indonesia and other places that have maintained a homeostasis. They have been in equilibrium with their environment for 1,000 years. And the key thing to note is that they have not tried to build or grow or create shiny objects. In other words, they haven't had this desire to change and alter the environment in ways that we have contrived to do. And so we have some models there, but of course we need to be humble enough to understand what that means and what implications it has for how we see ourselves in relation to the world that we exist in.
Yeah, Kevin, I'm sorry, I just would like to let Kevin add another angle because I commented and several others did in some of the earlier sessions about indigenous peoples and how much we can learn from them as well as nature. So, but along those lines, Kevin, you brought the...
I'm here. Yeah, I've been a Mahayana Buddhist for 19 years, so I value all life as equal. Human, dogs, cats, and they all have a right to live as much as we do. And I feel that capitalism isn't going to solve the problem that capitalism has caused.
Mm-hmm. But you introduced, Kevin, you introduced...
Can I give an example? Like in California, the native Indians used to manage the forest. You passed laws to ban them doing the burning. Then you have this big problem now.
Yeah. Kevin, you used the S word, spirituality.
Yes.
Would you care to say just a little bit more about that?
Yeah, no problem. To me, we are more than just the body. We are actual spiritual beings, and I've actually, through meditation, realized that we have what we call a watcher. we are separate from our minds. And in deep meditation, I've also now know 2 of my previous lives. And my last life, I was a Hindu and I was murdered by the Muslims. And that connection is because my father was in India during the war. That's the karma. And all my life, I've had this spiritual side to me, and I've always felt adrift. There's a song by Brian Wilson called "I Guess I Just Wasn't Made for These Times." And when I looked at the world, particularly early 2000, I couldn't live in England anymore. It had gone so far capitalist and individualistic to how it was in the 70s. I had to leave. So 2007, I gave up my bank job, came to Thailand as a volunteer teacher, found a very spiritual country to live in, and I got offered a permanent job. So I taught 7 years in Thailand, 4 years in China, and then retired here at 66. And transitioning from retirement, I spent 6 months in a Buddhist temple in Thailand. So I think quite often we look at things in a very cold light of day, but there's another angle to this as well.
Yeah, maybe the angle. A few of us have been using a book out of the Jesuit community called, for education purposes, called Healing Earth. Healing Earth. It's excellent because it's a good read for students to bring them up on the natural systems things, dynamics, which is generally underlooked in business schools, obviously education. But what I'm commenting on about that is that whole book is infused in every single chapter with ethical and spiritual questions for the students to think about. It's really framed, in essence, as a quintessential spiritual issue.
Well, one of the big problems, probably not quite, is people, particularly in America, are obese. Now, one simple solution is bring mindfulness into eating, and you eat less.
Yeah, actually, to link up with that and the point about biomimicry you brought up, and what Dilip was talking about in terms of indigenous populations, I've always wondered about biomimicry in terms of consumption. We don't see any obese animals in the wild. Yeah, domestic animals do get obese because we overfeed them, but you don't see an obese in the wild, in nature. Nature doesn't take more than it needs. So
but, yeah, I see that.
Can we learn from that as a means of biomimicry?
Yeah.
When I reflect on the West, we seem to have far more than we need. Like, I live in Thailand. I have no chairs. I sit on the floor like the Thais. I have a thin blanket. I sleep on the floor. You know, I become native, but I don't need all. The only thing we need is a car because the transport's so bad. But apart from that, you know, all the food is produced locally. You know, we buy locally.
Thank you, Sarah. I was just thanking Sandra for reminding me of a wonderful session in the Humanistic Management Association with 4 hours. Donald Trent Jacobs, PhD, fantastic. Yeah, there's a lot of learning, but Rochelle Sumner, are you there? Would you like to ask your question or comment that you had earlier? I seem to have missed it.
Is Rochelle your student, Chris?
Yes.
Rochelle Sumner, is that the one, Christine?
Yes, Rochelle, you want to go ahead and ask your question?
I don't know if it's much of a question.
It's a comment, that's fine.
It's more like I believe that economics lacks some form of ethics that needs to be addressed in order for us to actually. Sorry, I'm.
No, that I think is a great point. In fact, if in our paper we do talk about the separation thesis, the economic perspective has taken on this view of amorality, which, if you really think about it, is a nonsensical notion. How can anything that affects humans be amoral, right? That means it's neither moral nor immoral, and that's impossible when you really think about it in the context of anything, even not just humans, touching anything else. It will always have some element of morality about it if we think long enough. And so I think you're bringing up a really, really important point, that with the invocation of what was called the separation thesis, it took away the notion of thinking about our actions particularly in a business context and an economics context in moral terms, which I would think is a major source of where we find ourselves today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and didn't Andy Hoffman talk about earlier today, a real need as one of his nine points to start training future business leaders and managers to take a moral lens?
Absolutely. I think we have made ethics courses in business schools a separate thing. And the idea of integrating it with everything we do, and that everything touches on something else. Which I guess goes back. Unfortunately, I couldn't attend the systems thinking session, but that's where it also ties in together.
He reported to my.
We should remember, though, that Adam Smith did talk about
theory of moral sentiments.
We should remember that Adam Smith did talk about the morality of markets very clearly, but somewhere along the way that part got ditched and markets continued without the morality.
That's a tremendously important point. And when earlier on we were talking about self-interest, it's, to my way of thinking, and I think Adam Smith's too, from what I read about him, it's not so much self-interest. It's, he was talking about enlightened self-interest. He was talking about that kind of self-interest that is much broader and moral, and that has really gotten completely missing, and even by the advocates of the following, claiming to be disciples of Adam Smith's original thoughts. That whole aspect. I'm glad you noticed that too, Dylan, because that just seemed to leap out at me when I finally went back and read his original stuff. So,
any more questions or comments?
Anne's got a challenging question. Annie Prince?
Oh.
Would you?
None of Christine's students.
I'm sorry, there's a lot of background noise. Can you hear my voice clearly?
Yes, very good, Annie.
Okay, so how might we incentivize businesses to adopt sustainable practices? Even if we eliminate the neoclassical economic perspective, would corporations take an effort and address the negative externalities they cause, since that would hurt their profits?
Okay, I didn't hear any noise. Thank you, Annie.
Should I? The question I think Annie raised was, is that really profit? So yeah, if you go to there are some attempts today for more integrated reporting, for more accounting for externalities. There is the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board and institutions like that are attempting to bring these perspectives in. But I think eventually it goes down to a more values-based perspective. To use the example that Joel brought up about interface carpets, when they started off, one thing I think is very, very clear about interface carpets is when Ray Anderson started this, he first had a change in identity when he read Paul Hawkins' book, The Ecology of Commerce. He said Paul Hawkins condemned him to being a plunderer of the earth. So that value shift took place at that point, and a shift in identity for himself. But then in a very practical sense, the company chose, or he pushed the company to choose, to even consider carbon emissions as waste to be eliminated. So they made the choices to account for every externality that they caused and do something about it. The number of companies that emulate what Interface did is extremely limited, and if we can see a more widespread adoption of those kinds of perspectives, I think we could see change. I think it really calls on how we in business schools and in education in general teach these kinds of things. So far, we actually teach them not to account for these externalities. So I think that kind of shift is very, very critical.
Very good. I would use the word he enrolled in Interface.
Actually, you're right.
More than pushed. I think that's a remarkable change management story.
Absolutely.
In itself.
Absolutely.
I'd love to hear from our friend Jim Stoner. Jim?
Hey, Jim. Nice to see you here.
Yeah. Chime in here about alternative narratives.
Okay, I'll send off a note without checking my spelling. It's a little messy. I've said a couple things. You might want to look at the Declaration of Business School Independence, which is a rewrite of the U.S. Declaration of Independence, line by line, challenging the neoliberal narrative and making clear, well, pointing to what we do in business school, which is business as usual. Thanks, Joel. And Frank, you might want to look at Frank Werner's and my new introductory finance textbook, which is intended for the core course in finance in graduate or undergraduate schools. And it rejects shareholder wealth maximization in the neoliberal narrative. And I guess the last thing I typed out there is, if each one of us simply started teaching our course, whatever we teach, grounded in sustainability, finance, marketing, anything else like that, we can learn a lot. And I guess the last thing I'll put in a plug for globalmovement.net, which is some business schools that are committed to transforming their curriculum within 3 years and some of their research to be fully aligned with the need for a sustainable world, under the theory that if a lot of people try and do this, we might learn something. Thanks, Joel.
Thank you, Jim.
And I apologize for my spelling.
There's no need. I focus more on the sentiment than the spelling. I guess as a very poor speller, very poor typist and speller myself, perhaps. Any other questions? You can just shout them out if you want. And
yeah, we have 7 minutes left, so.
We don't have a huge.
Has a lot of good articles that we should follow up on.
Yes.
Can I ask one thing? When in China and Thailand, no one questions climate change. But over half of my American Facebook friends say climate change and COVID are a hoax.
Sorry, I didn't catch that, Kevin.
There's something about it being a hoax.
Yeah, in China and Thailand, no one questions climate change.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
But over half of my American Facebook friends say climate change and COVID are a hoax.
The solution's simple, Kevin. You just need different Facebook friends.
No, but I'm saying if they don't believe, they believe it's not, if it's a hoax, they're not going to support the government if they want to take action that affects them.
Yeah, in an earlier comment, I think another session, Kevin, I think it was you who noted that the relatively few deaths from COVID in Thailand, and everybody wears masks there.
Yeah.
And you know, we have an independent American spirit, which is a way of thinking that I'm sure has some good, both sides, up and down. Yeah, yes.
But I think what Kevin's pointing out is
a good point.
perhaps demonstrates how much harder the problem is. We have, at least in the capitalist world, the notion of self-interest is so deeply embedded in the culture that thinking about anything without a self-interest perspective becomes really, really hard to do. So even things like climate change and COVID are, are, are filtered through the lens of self-interest, which then becomes a reason to deny it. So I think that really does suggest that how much harder it is going to be to change the mindsets, and how big the challenge is for us.
So, Gerard, that brings me back to your consumption trap that you've been raising on a number of occasions over the last couple of days. And you know, even in China and India and places like that, they're still in that consumption trap because we have this insidious idea that we have held up for the whole world that, you know, rising standards of living is what the human life is about, apparently. And so as long as we have that idea, we have this consumption trap. And I always go back and marvel at what Gandhi said in the 1930s when the British asked him, do you want Indians to have British standards of living? And he said, oh no, that would require many planets. It took me a long time to understand what he meant in 1930. So he was way ahead of us, but he said it very clearly. And it took us a long time to understand what he meant. And so as long as we have this idea that we can all have these standards of living, and I say this even as I sit in my own home on a computer, I understand the irony of that. This is where it takes us. It's just not possible. And people are telling us it's not possible. They've been telling us for decades it's not possible.
Interesting. I just rewatched that movie, also Richard Attenborough's movie of Gandhi. And, you know, he spent a long time getting back to the indigenous Indian peoples out there in the fields and the farms, you know, and transform it. So Isabella, you wanna make the last brilliant comments for us?
Oh, wow. What an honor.
Tie it all together for us, darling.
This is I was following all the comments, and I really agree with many views and, you know, concerns raised. Maybe my last comment would be, I have a very little daughter. She's just 1.5. And I always try to ask myself, in 30 years, what will she say about, oh my gosh, can you believe back then this is what people thought was normal and ethical? And how will business look like in 30 years? So trying to understand what we consider normal, which values and ethics, and how to make them appear abnormal and unethical, such as, you know, competitiveness, greed, limitless consumption. So that is always what's on my mind when I hear about and speak about the sustainability and, you know, our planet and ethics and all those things. I don't know if that was brilliant.
I like it. I like it. I always think it would be great if everyone could think about some small child or some small children everywhere and be in presence that for themselves and think about what they're going to say and how they're going to live. Yeah. Christine, anything else you want to add?
In that context, just to add to Isabella's last word, I think we need to be talking about more of a caring economy rather than a well-being economy, because if we care for one another and for everything that has a life, I think we will automatically go to a well-being economy, because what do we really care about is good health and for not only humans, but for plant and animal life, because without that, we cannot survive.
Here. And I hope those won't be Isabella's last words.
No, for now.
Isabella's daughter is living, so we should say Viva Vivi.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, Gerard, you want to say goodbye to the folks and we'll wrap this up?
Thank you so much for a wonderful conversation and great comments and suggestions. We'd love to continue to hear from you. The URL for our article is posted in the chat. Somewhere there. If you want, I can just post it again.
And Sandra,
yeah, that's it.
Sandra posted some very, very good articles, one of her own and a couple of others as well. Yeah, these chats, so just to remind you, the sessions are being recorded and saved. The chats are also being recorded and saved. So if you didn't get any of this stuff, you just can call that up at the Rutgers website that they've been sending around. Gosh, it was good. I liked it.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much.